So what is up, Africana fam? Today I'll be showing you guys how I make my lace closure wigs from start to finish. So right now what I'm starting with is a wig tripod to hold up my dome head and a dome head. You want to make sure that you have a dome head that is your size. I have a 23-inch since that is my circumference of my head. And I'm also going to use a spandex dome cap as well. So right now I'm just signifying you guys which one's the front and which one's the back. The back clearly has the little bump in the back. So you just want to make sure that you have your wig cap nicely secured and placed correctly. So right now what I'm doing is I am placing my wig cap right on the dome head. And you just want to make sure it's nice and snug without any wrinkles before you commence on to the next step. Now to have a seamless fit and make sure that everything fits, I'm going to go ahead and use a T-pin. You could get T-pins from your local beauty supply store. And I'm just going to go ahead and drag that back area and just make it longer. This just helps mimic the natural nape hairline and overall just give you a seamless fit. So I went ahead and just used those two lines as my outline to just drag down the wig cap so I could mimic my nape area. Now onto the closure. You want to make sure that your closure is about an inch above or an inch in front of your wig cap, just to make sure that everything looks aligned and you just don't see a bunch of tracks and stuff. So right now what I'm doing is I'm going to go ahead and take my T-pins and start placing the closure where I want to place it at. So I first start off in the middle of the closure, and then I'm going to go to one of the sides at the far back of the closure. And then what I like to do is I kind of like to go in a zigzag or X motion. This will just ensure that I am stretching out the closure as much as possible. So the next part that I will be pinning down is the far left, well, at least my left, the far left in the front. Right afterwards, just to stretch it out. And you guys are going to understand why I do this like that instead of just working on one side and then doing the other side. So right after that, now I'm going to go ahead and go in the back. And then after that, I'm going to go in the front. And this method just ensures that your closure is stretched out as much as possible. There are no lumps and bumps. You want to make sure that your closure is flat AF, okay? So as you guys can see, I'm going to show you guys how it looks. I'm over here putting my hands against it, and like there's no flipping of the closure, so it's nice and snug and tight. There's no air bubbles, no lumps, no bumps. This is how you do it, is doing the X method, okay? Y'all learned it from me first, all right? So now moving on to the next step, I'm going to go ahead and just put my hair into a ponytail just to get all that hair out of the way so we could go ahead and start sewing. Now when it comes to sewing and longevity, I love to use nylon thread instead of cotton thread because cotton thread tends to swell and then end up breaking apart. As for nylon thread, it doesn't do that. So right now I'm going to go ahead and take my needle and I'm going to go ahead and put it in the hole. Pause. And I'm just gonna go ahead and just kind of like, you know, stretch it out until like it's like arm's length for me. I don't like it too long. And I'm just gonna go ahead and tie my knot. And how I tie my knot is just I wrap it around my pointer finger and my middle finger, and I just loop it around, and we're just gonna go ahead and tie that knot. Now when it comes to sewing, I like to sew my closures over instead of under. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just poking my needle through the edge of the closure, and I'm just going to go ahead and just pull it through taut, and then to make my knot, to make sure it doesn't go anywhere, I'm just going to go in that same exact place, and then I'm going to go ahead and sew in that same exact spot. And that's how I create my knots. I don't like to make noticeable knots at the edges of my closure, just because, you know, I just feel like, I don't know. This is my method. It doesn't unravel for me or anything. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going to go ahead and start sewing. I like to sew very close together. I like to close knit so there's no lumps or bumps at all, and then pull tautly. So when I'm sewing, I'm just sewing in between, and you want to make sure that your needle is in between the two pieces of thread, and you're just going to go ahead and pull taut. Now to make sure that your thread is even tauter and tight, you could probably, like, within 5 threads, you could go ahead and just tie your knot right then and there. And as you guys can see, I'm just gonna go ahead and take the thread, and I'm gonna loop it around. I loop it around 2 to 3 times. For a nice tight knot, I will loop it around 3 times, and I just pull it through. Don't mind it getting a little messy right there. There was a lot of confusion, but we fixed that. And yeah, and to just make sure it's taut, I just take the 2 strings and I just kind of, you know, pull it apart. Just to make sure it's nice and tight. But when it comes to closures, I just like to work on one side and then go on the other side and then work on the back last. Again, you just want to make sure that you're pulling correctly and one side isn't lopsided or anything. So I like to work on one side and then go on the other side and then work in the back last. So this is like a 3-part process. We go on one side, we work on the other side, and the back is last. Now I went ahead and worked on the other side, and then I'm just going to continue on to the back from the other side, and we're just going to finish up that back piece. And again, like I said, you just want to make sure that the needle is in between the 2 pieces of thread while you're sewing. And I'm just pulling taut until we get to the end. Now, what I like to do to make sure that my closures are nice and secure is after I reach the ending and I kind of meet where the two threads meet at and everything is one, I like to kind of just go ahead and backtrack a little bit. So like once I'm done, I like to probably go back at least 3 sews and then tie my knot. I just feel like this just gives it extra security. And if you know what backtracking is, it's like the same thing as when you're using machine and you just backtrack at the ending of, like, you know, your sewing, just to ensure that it is secure. And now on to the marking. I went ahead and cut off the thread, and now we're on to the marking. I like to use my Sharpie metallic marker just to make sure that I am marking my wig correctly. And what I like to do when it comes to marking, I like to mark above the elastic band part at the bottom. So I start like directly above where the elastic band is, and I'm just gonna go ahead and mark my places of where the tracks are going to be, and I like to spread them out within an inch apart. So each line is about an inch apart. If you want to be more specific, you could go ahead and use a measuring tape and just cut a mark off each number when it comes to inches, and then you just work from there. But I kind of just eyeball it because who has time for that? That's just me. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and just make sure that my lines are about an inch apart. You don't want them too close together, but you also don't want them too far apart either. And I just like to go ahead and just go straight across until I start reaching the top. All right, you guys, this is how everything should look, and we are done. No, let me stop. So we're gonna go ahead and go into the sewing. This hair is sponsored for iShow Hair. I have their loose deep wave in 228s and 226s, and I have a 20-inch 4x4 lace closure. Okay, this hair was absolutely bomb, and I actually enjoyed this hair. It was very good quality. So right now what I like to do is I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of measure out the hair. I like to double weft my hair because I like my hair thick, especially if I'm working with 4 or more bundles. So right now what I'm doing, I'm just gonna go ahead and just stick my needle through the wefts, and you want to make sure that you stick it through both wefts. And what I like to do is after I sit down there and I do that, I like to take my T-pins and I like to place one in the middle and then one at the edge, just so when I'm sewing, it is not, you know, falling all over the place, and I just kind of have it in place, and it's just a lot easier for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and, you know, pin it in the middle and then pin it at the edges. So now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and sew in that same spot again from where I initially went ahead and just, you know, sew the hair through. And whenever I'm sewing the hair, I don't like to sew through the elastic band. So there's the mesh and then there's the elastic band. I just sew through the mesh just so that I make sure that I'm like, you know, have a lot of stretch and there's nothing crazy going on, you know. And when it comes to sewing my wigs, I like to undersew. So that means I'm just sewing underneath the wefts. I don't like to pierce the wefts when it comes to sewing because it messes up the wefts, and overall the hair doesn't last as long when you pierce the needle through the wefts. Okay, so you want to avoid that as much as possible. So when it comes to under threading, it's a lot more tighter as well as just flatter. It also too, it just gives longevity to your bundles, especially if you plan on reusing it. So I just undersew. I'm just gonna go upwards in an upwards motion, and then, you know, every, you know, 5 to 7 to 10 stitches, I like to go ahead and just give myself a knot just to make sure that it is nice and snug. Now, what I like to do when it comes to understitching, there are two ways of understitching. In the beginning, I just understitch and just pulled it all the way through. Right now, what I'm doing is when I'm understitching, I'm going to go ahead and understitch, and then I'm just going to wrap that that thread that I'm holding right there from the last stitch, and I'm just going to go ahead and just kind of wrap it over the needle, and I'm just going to go ahead and pull that through. And what that does, it just gives you a tighter feel. I don't know how to explain it, but it just gives you a tighter feel, and overall it just looks neater. I'm not gonna lie. So at first I started with just regular understitching, but now I'm just gonna go ahead and understitch and then loop it over the needle and then just pull through. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do that until I reach the end. And what I like to do at the end is I like to go ahead and just backtrack a little bit, and then I'm just going to go ahead and create my knot by tying my thread 3 times around the needle, and then I'm just going to go ahead and pull it through, and then we're just going to cut it off. And I just like to separate the thread and just kind of like, you know, tighten it more, just to make sure that I, you know, got it tight and my knot does not loosens up. And usually when it comes to the end, I like to kind of knot it about 3 stitches. So within 3 stitches, I just knot it, but I kind of backtrack and then knot it back up. Hopefully I'm making sense, you guys, and hopefully you guys are catching along. Again, I'm just separating those two, the threads. I'm just gonna go ahead and just tie it taut just so it's nice and tight. And I'm gonna go ahead and take my scissors and cut it. Then I'm just gonna remove the T-pin, and then I like to cut my wefts. Yes, you guys, I am doing the unthinkable, y'all. I am cutting my wefts, and I'll tell you guys why I cut my wefts. I cut my wefts because, listen, at the end of the day, life is too short to be having a bulky wig, okay? I'm sorry, but just cutting your wefts just gives you a sleeker look, all right? But anyways, back to better and more important things. I went ahead and just finished like 3/4 of the wig. As you guys can see, it looks nice and neat. Your stitching is looking immaculate. And yeah, so I went ahead and just double knotted. I went ahead and double wefted it. 3 of the bundles. In the last bundle, I like to single it, and I'll tell you guys why I like to single it. Again, you want to make sure that your closure is nice and flat, or just your wig is nice and flat in general. So when you single it at the top, it just gives you a more sleeker look, and it's flatter, and it just lays more laid. Come on, you guys, it's not a rocket. So right now what I'm doing is I'm just going to go ahead and just finish up. You want to just follow your guides of what you drew out. That is pretty much your blueprint. And you guys, this saves a tremendous amount of time, especially as a beginner, because the last thing you ever want to do is to sew your wefts too close apart or too close together, and you just run out of hair and you got to take down your entire wig. That happened to me plenty of times before, you guys. So mark out where you are going to place your tracks at. I promise you it will save you for the long run, okay? And now we are at the finishing stretch, y'all. We are almost there. Hang in, y'all. We are almost there. So right now what I'm doing is I'm working on the last track, which is right next to the closure. You want to make sure that you sew right next to the closure. There's no gaps between your weft and your closure, because guess what, you guys, you won't have a seamless look if you have a gap in between your closure and your wefts. So you just want to make sure that your weft is not on top but right next to your closure. It's like they're married. You want to marry your closure and your weft, especially the last weft. Like the last weft is what really makes or break the entire thing. And right now, guys, I'm just over here understitching. It's pretty simple. You're just gonna go ahead and understitch, and I'm just understitching right next to the closure. And you guys, I just went ahead and just cut off that weft, and I'm just gonna go ahead and cut off that thread as well, and we are done. I went ahead and took off the wig off of the dome head, and right now what I'm doing is I'm cutting the excess cloth underneath the closure, because who wants a black closure underneath? That's not a no-go. And you want to make sure that you're looking at the stitching of where your closure is, and you want to cut right next to it, not on it, but just right next to it, just so that you're cutting off most of the cloth as much as possible without cutting off the thread. Alright, y'all, I'm just showing you guys how the wig looks like on my head. As you guys can see, this wig fits perfectly on my head. It's not covering my ears or anything. It fits exactly where my head is supposed to lay at. And this is how the wig looks like styled. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe to my channel, and I hope to see you guys in my next video. Later!